Hello and welcome to another episode. Today we're going back to Egypt, but not just anywhere. We're reflying down to the Upper Egypt canyons, where an anonymous man has been hiding for 4,800 years. But first, a word from our sponsor, Masterworks. And then about 4,500 years ago, the ancient Egyptians started making tombs so elaborate they became pyramids. Then right after that, they built their whole city into a pyramid. That is until now. Because today we're going to travel back to the beginning of the pharaohs and meet a mysterious man who held the key to unlocking Egypt's past. Our story starts here. Over 10,000 years ago, humans spread across the globe, growing into different societies and civilizations. These tombs date back to between 2,850 and 2550 BCE, which would make them over 4,800 years old. Before the Old Kingdom even began, Egypt was known as Upper and Lower Egypt, two regions separated by the troublesome Middle Egypt. The Egyptians weren't exactly known for being united. At the same time, ancient Egyptians were creating some of the most iconic tombs ever. But wait, what about before that?
Ads!
What was going on before Egypt became Egypt? Before Ramses ruled over the Hittites? So the question was, can scientists sequence the ancient DNA from a man who's been dead for thousands of years? The sand protected his bones from other forms of degradation, meaning that he remained intact for thousands of years. As soon as they got the results back, everything changed. After years of hard work, their breakthrough came in the form of a single tooth. After all, DNA degrades quickly, especially in hot climates like Egypt. She realized the skull she'd seen in a photo decades earlier was actually sitting in a drawer with the rest of the skeleton. The paper detailed the complete genome of a 4,800-year-old Egyptian man, a discovery that shocked the world. They were able to publish their findings in July of 2025. This allowed the researchers to study his DNA and trace his genetic lineage, ultimately revealing his surprising ancestry. This means that early Egyptians were closely related to farmers from ancient Morocco. This is the area in the Middle East where agriculture first began. It includes parts of modern-day Syria, Jordan, and Iraq. And his mtDNA motifs point to ancient Anatolia, present-day Turkey. And while we know a lot about New Kingdom Egypt, we don't really know much about this time. It all started when an amateur British archaeologist named Flinders Petrie uncovered a series of tombs and settlements near the Nile River in a place called Al-Nuweirat. Well, you'll have to watch to find out. A single male skeleton found in Tomb 10 had an unusually high amount of carbon in his bones. This discovery shows just how far-reaching the ancient Egyptians' genetic legacy is. We were surprised to find that the preservation was good enough to get a complete genome. The bones in his shoulders and knees showed signs of arthritis, suggesting that he worked hard throughout his life. Instead, they were part of a larger web of cultures and populations that stretched from Japan to the Fertile Crescent. They discovered that he was related to two groups of ancient humans, the Genome and the Ainu. Carbon, I think you mean carbon-14, the radioactive isotope used to date organic remains. This guy was almost 5,000 years dead. Thanks to the efforts of Professor Jacobs and her team, the ancient man's skeleton was given back its dignity and laid to rest in a cemetery in Cairo. They learned that he was probably around 60 years old when he died, shorter than average, but with a full head of hair and a beard. But there was one thing that stood out among the burials. But the real treasure wasn't found until decades later. And with the help of an Oxford University team led by Professor Sir Arthur Keith, he was reconstructed using clay to reveal how people looked during Egypt's formative years. Sequencing a 5,000-year-old individual from such a hot climate was almost unheard of. During a wartime lull in 1940, Oxford curator Bertha Porter sifted through old boxes in the basement and came across the missing pieces of the man from Tomb 10. After storing the skeleton in a museum archive for over 100 years, it was finally brought into the light to reveal the well-preserved bones of a man who lived during the Naqada III period. The only problem was no one knew anything about his DNA. But fortunately, they had something that helped preserve his body, the desert itself. In fact, things were going so well that researchers felt confident enough to send some of his bones to be tested in a lab. His DNA revealed a shocking truth about the ancient Egyptians that completely changed everything we knew about their history. So what did the tests reveal? And now back to our story. Professor Mar Al-Amin, and the team of Mores. Jacobs were determined to crack the code of ancient DNA. They managed to extract DNA from the tooth without contaminating it with modern human DNA. A feat that earned them a spot in the journal Nature, and boy did they have a lot to say. One of the co-authors, Professor Jacobs, said, "We never thought retrieving a genome this old from Egypt was possible." To put this into perspective, the last time anyone had sequenced an ancient Egyptian's genome, it was a 3,000-year-old individual, thanks to the dry desert air. The ancient man's DNA was protected from the elements and survived for thousands of years. Get ready for this. Around 80% of his DNA matched with Neolithic North Africans, specifically those from the Maghreb region. And what about the other 20%? Turns out that he also had ties to the Fertile Crescent. More specifically, his Y-DNA haplogroup, E1b1b, is common among modern-day Egyptians and Bedouins from the Sinai Peninsula, as well as people from the Levant. What's interesting is that these two regions represent exactly where trade along the Nile began, connecting the Mediterranean and Red Sea ports to the Fertile Crescent in Mesopotamia. Using these genetic clues, researchers were able to trace his lineage back to the very beginnings of human migration. These two groups migrated to Japan from Siberia and eventually gave rise to the modern-day Japanese population. It's clear that the ancient Egyptians weren't as isolated as once thought. Now let's take a closer look at the man himself. Using a combination of archaeology and genetic science, they were able to piece together a biography of his life. The markings on his bones told a story of a life well lived. Osteologist Meredith D. is all about digging into bones and uncovering their stories.